Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, we are going to be looking into a true crime story.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, this one's really interesting. It's the case of Wesley Ernest, and we're going to be basing it on this 48 Hours episode.
Okay, I've heard of this one.
Oh, have you? Yeah, have you seen this one?
I have, yeah. It's a wild one.
It really is, and it's got all the elements that kind of draw you in, you know. You got the seemingly picture-perfect couple,
Right.
and then this really shocking death, and then this web of secrets.
Yeah, you just don't know who to believe.
Right. Like you're constantly kind of flipping back and forth. Like, is he guilty? Is he not? What's going on here?
Absolutely.
So I don't know. For you, what do you think is like the most interesting thing about cases like this?
I think for me, it's the psychology behind it all.
Yeah.
How can somebody project this image of a perfect life
Yeah.
when really there's just this deep, dark secret underneath it all?
Yeah.
And I think, this case, we see that with Wesley Ernest.
Mm-hmm.
He was this assistant principal, well respected in his community, but accused of murdering his wife, Jocelyn.
Right.
And so we're going to look at the evidence and the trials. But also, I think for me, what's interesting is like the human element of it all, the manipulation, the
Yeah.
desperation, the motivations that can really drive a person to do something so extreme.
Right. And how do they get to that point? You know, like how is somebody able to like compartmentalize all that?
Yeah.
So let's actually start then with the victim, in this case, Jocelyn.
Right.
What do we know about her as a person? I mean, from the episode, they really painted this picture of her as like she had it all, right?
Yeah, she really did. She was successful, a financial manager. She had been a star athlete.
Wow.
And she just seemed to be very loved by her family and friends.
Yeah.
But behind that, like that picture, of success and happiness, there was a troubled marriage. And she had told her best friend about Wesley's behavior.
Oh, really?
Yeah, controlling behavior.
Wow.
She'd even said that she feared for her safety.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so.
That's scary. I mean, knowing now what we know,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder, what was really going on behind closed doors?
Oh, absolutely. And, those fears weren't just things she was saying.
Right.
She actually kept journals. And in one entry, she wrote, "If I die, Wesley killed me and he probably shot me."
Wow.
So these journals become a really crucial part of the investigation later on.
Right.
Because they offer this glimpse into what their relationship was really like.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's like a piece of evidence right there.
Absolutely.
But before we even jump ahead to the investigation and trials, let's talk about Wesley a little bit more.
Okay.
Because in the episode, he comes across as this charismatic guy,
Yes.
respected educator.
Right.
But there are these hints that there's a darker side to him.
Yeah, I mean, there's this contrast in how people describe him.
Yeah.
Some saw him as charming and outgoing,
Yeah.
but others, and especially those close to the situation, saw him as manipulative and controlling.
Wow.
And what's interesting, too, is his financial situation.
Oh, yeah, that was a big part of it.
He was in deep debt, over $1 million in debt.
Oh.
Even though he had a good income, he was living a lifestyle he just couldn't afford, and he was lying to people about it, about being independently wealthy.
So it was kind of this keeping up appearances kind of facade, but with like really, really high stakes potentially.
Right, exactly.
Do we know if Jocelyn knew about his financial troubles?
It's hard to say for sure, but, they were separated and going through a divorce at the time.
Right.
And a big point of contention was their lake house.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that from the episode.
Jocelyn wanted to sell it, but Wesley was like, absolutely not. Even though he was struggling financially, he was adamant that they keep it.
So that's kind of a big question, right? Like, was he desperate enough to do something drastic to fix his money problems?
Yeah, I mean, that's what investigators are going to start to wonder, right?
Right.
Because now you have this potential motive. And so now let's move to the crime scene then.
Okay.
And what made investigators think that maybe this wasn't a suicide like it first appeared?
Yeah, because initially it seemed like it was open and shut, right?
Yeah.
So what happened?
So picture this. Jocelyn's friend Marcy, who had a key to the house, she goes in and she finds Jocelyn's body.
Okay.
There's a gun by her side. There's a typed suicide note. Like, it seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But there were these little inconsistencies that just didn't sit right.
Okay, like what?
For example, the thermostat was set to 90 degrees.
Like 90 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah, like sweltering hot.
What? Why would somebody do that?
That's exactly what they thought. Like, why? It seemed like somebody was trying to maybe speed up the decomposition process or
Oh, wow.
mess with the timeline of death.
Oh, okay.
And then also the position of the gun and the bullet wound.
Yeah.
It just suggested that maybe the body had been moved.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so all these little things started to make them think maybe this wasn't a suicide after all. Maybe this was staged.
Okay, so we've got a suspicious crime scene.
Right,
We got a potential motive with the money problems.
right.
What about the suicide note itself?
Well, the suicide note was interesting. It mentioned a new love,
Okay.
which nobody, including Jocelyn's closest friends and family, knew anything about.
Really?
Yeah, so that was strange. And I was like, is this real? Is this not? Who is this new love?
Oh, wow.
And then here's the big thing.
What's that?
Wesley's fingerprints were found on the note,
Oh, no!
even though he said he was living hours away at the time.
I mean, that seems pretty incriminating, right?
Yeah.
Did he have an explanation for that?
Well, he said that he had lived in that house for 10 years, so his fingerprints could have been there from before.
Okay.
But for investigators, this was a big red flag, especially with all those other inconsistencies, right?
Yeah, totally.
So it's starting to look like maybe this was not a suicide at all, but a very carefully planned murder.
Wow. All right, so we're back, and we left off with like a whole bunch of unanswered questions.
Yeah, a lot of mystery still.
Yeah, like a lot of suspicions surrounding Wesley, but not a whole lot of hard evidence.
Right.
So where do investigators even go from here?
Well, they really start to focus on Wesley,
Okay.
and they start digging into his past,
Mm-hmm.
looking for anything that could connect him to Jocelyn's death.
Okay.
And it turns out he had been living this secret life.
What do you mean?
He was having an affair
What?
with a woman named Shamika Wright.
Okay.
And he had even told her that he was separated from Jocelyn and that he wanted to marry her.
Oh my gosh, so he was telling her that he was single?
Yeah, basically living this double life.
Wow, that's a whole other level of deception.
Yeah.
What does Shamika have to say about all this?
Well, she did back up what Wesley had said about wanting to marry her,
Okay.
but she also said that she didn't know about his financial troubles.
So he was lying to her too.
It seems like it, yeah, so he's not just being deceitful in his personal life, but also in how he presents himself to other people.
It's amazing how someone can keep up that kind of facade for
Yeah.
so long.
Yeah, it is.
But I'm curious, I mean, wouldn't Jocelyn have known about the affair? I mean, they were going through a divorce.
That's a good question. You would think so, right?
Okay.
But remember, they were separated,
Right.
and we don't really know all the details of their relationship during that time.
Yeah, true.
But the investigation did uncover that Wesley had been pressuring Jocelyn to sell their lake house.
Oh, right. The lake house. But wasn't she the one who mainly paid for it?
Yeah, she was the one who primarily financed its construction.
That's crazy.
So it just seems so unfair.
Right. Like he's trying to use the sale of the house to fix his own money problems.
Right, exactly.
So what else do we learn from those journals?
Well, in her journals, Jocelyn describes Wesley as being really controlling,
Oh, wow.
even during their separation.
Mm-hmm.
She mentions like several times where he would just show up at her house unannounced
Real.
or like make demands about the sale of the house.
That's really creepy.
Yeah. And remember that statement about fearing for her life?
Yeah.
It starts to feel like he was putting a lot of pressure on her
Right.
and that the lake house was not just about the money, but about control.
So it's like a symbol of power for him.
Exactly. Yeah. Like this was his dream. This was his status symbol.
Mhm.
And he was going to do whatever it took to keep it.
Even if it meant manipulating Jocelyn.
Maybe even worse. We don't know.
Oh my gosh. So now we've got a potential motive,
Right.
a suspect with a history of lying,
Yes.
and a crime scene that's super suspicious.
It is.
What happens next?
Well, about 15 months after Jocelyn's death,
Okay.
the lake house burns down.
Wait, are you serious? It burns down.
Yeah, completely destroyed.
Was anybody hurt?
No, nobody was hurt, but Wesley was nowhere to be found when the fire started.
Okay, that is really suspicious.
Yeah.
Did they ever figure out what caused the fire?
Officially, they never determined the exact cause,
Okay.
but arson was definitely suspected.
Right, because it's like, why would the house he was fighting so hard to keep suddenly go up in flames?
Yeah, and remember, he's facing a ton of debt
Uh-huh.
and the possibility of a murder trial.
So is this like an insurance scam?
Maybe it could have been a way to get some money
Right.
and also potentially get rid of a crime scene.
That's a pretty bold move considering he's already the main suspect.
Right. It's risky.
So did this affect the murder investigation at all?
Well, the judge said that they couldn't use any evidence about the fire in the murder trial
Oh, really?
because they couldn't directly link it to Jocelyn's death.
Okay.
But for investigators, it definitely raised a lot of questions
Yeah, of course.
about Wesley's character.
Like, how far is he willing to go?
Exactly.
So we have all this evidence,
We do.
but it's all kind of circumstantial.
Yeah.
So how does the prosecution even begin to build a case against him?
Well, with the first trial approaching,
Ugh.
they faced this big challenge.
What is that?
Jocelyn's journals, the ones with those direct accusations against Wesley,
Right.
they were deemed inadmissible,
Oh, wow.
so they couldn't use them as evidence.
Oh, that's gotta be tough.
Yeah, so they had to find a different way to tell their story,
Right.
and they decided to focus on this handwritten timeline that Jocelyn had been keeping
Okay.
as part of her therapy.
Uh-huh.
And their argument was that Wesley had tampered with it.
Tampered with it? Like how?
They think that he added entries after she died to make it seem like their relationship was better than it was.
Oh, so he's making it look like they were happy.
Right, to try and throw off the idea that they had a troubled marriage.
Okay, that's interesting.
So it wasn't just deception,
Right. Yeah.
but also manipulation of evidence.
So did the defense have anything to say about that?
Well, of course, they insisted the timeline was real
Okay.
and that the prosecution was just trying to make something out of nothing.
Right.
They said that Wesley had no reason to hurt Jocelyn
Mm-hmm.
and that she took her own life. And they kept pointing out that there was no direct link between Wesley and the murder weapon.
Right.
So basically, their argument was that the prosecution's case was all based on speculation.
Okay, so it's like their word against his.
Right.
Okay, so we're back, and the first trial is about to begin.
Yeah, this is where things get really intense.
Yeah, because it's like a courtroom battle, right? It's like you've got these two sides
Absolutely.
with their own story of what happened, and they're trying to convince the jury that their version is the truth.
Yeah, and the prosecution, they really wanted to prove that Wesley was this cold-blooded killer,
Uh-huh.
driven by greed
Yeah.
and wanting to get out of debt.
Right.
While the defense, they were trying to paint him as like a victim of circumstance,
Uh-huh.
falsely accused and just caught up in all this.
So how did the prosecution approach this trial, knowing that they couldn't use Jocelyn's journals?
Well, they focused on the timeline. Remember that handwritten timeline that Jocelyn was keeping?
Yeah.
They argued that Wesley had messed with it after she died.
Like changed it.
Yeah, they thought he added entries to make it seem like he and Jocelyn were closer than they actually were.
Oh, so he's trying to make it look like they had a good relationship.
Right, to try and counter that idea that their marriage was in trouble.
Interesting. So he was not only lying, but potentially tampering with evidence.
Exactly.
Did the defense have a response to that?
They did. They said the timeline was authentic and that the prosecution was just grasping at straws. They insisted that Wesley had no reason to harm Jocelyn and that her death was a suicide. They kept pointing out that there was no direct connection between Wesley and the gun that was used.
So it's like their word against his again.
Yeah, it really came down to who the jury believed.
So what was like the turning point in the trial? Like, was there one moment where it felt like things shifted?
There was this really dramatic moment during cross-examination.
Okay.
The prosecutor asked Wesley this seemingly simple question about the timeline. He said, "If you wrote on the timeline, how did you get into the house to do so?"
Oh, okay.
And instead of just denying that he'd been in the house,
Mm-hmm.
Wesley started talking about a broken window at Jocelyn's place
Was?
and how he could have easily gotten in.
But they hadn't even accused him of like breaking in or anything.
No, not at all. But he offered that information up like he was trying to get ahead of an accusation that hadn't even been made.
So he basically incriminated himself without even realizing it.
Yeah, it was a huge blunder.
Wow. So did the prosecution like use that against him?
Oh, absolutely. They jumped on it.
Right.
They told the jury, look, he's already trying to come up with excuses and cover his tracks.
Wow.
Even though they hadn't even accused him of that specific thing.
That's wild. I mean, it seems like a small detail, but it
Yeah.
really reveals a lot about his character.
Yeah, it does. It's like he can't help but try to manipulate every situation.
So what happened? What did the jury decide?
Well, they deliberated for days.
Yeah.
Really went over all the evidence.
Mhm.
And in the end, they came back with a verdict.
What was it?
Guilty of first-degree murder.
Wow. So justice for Jocelyn.
It seemed like, everyone was relieved.
But wait a minute.
Yeah,
There's got to be another twist, right? This case is full of them.
there is.
What happened?
It turns out during deliberations, the jury had accidentally been given Jocelyn's journals.
What?
The ones that were supposed to be inadmissible.
No way. So they saw all of her accusations against Wesley.
Yeah, all of it.
Oh my gosh. That's a huge mistake.
It was.
So did the guilty verdict hold up?
No, the defense immediately asked for a mistrial,
Oh, wow.
arguing that the jury had been influenced by information they shouldn't have seen.
And the judge agreed?
The judge agreed. The guilty verdict was thrown out.
Wow. What a turn of events.
So they had to do a whole new trial.
Oh my gosh. So this whole thing is starting all over again.
Yeah.
So what was the atmosphere like going into this second trial?
It was tense for everyone.
Yeah.
Jocelyn's family and friends had felt that moment of relief.
Right.
And now they had to go through it all again.
Yeah.
And Wesley, even though he got a second chance, he still had that first guilty verdict hanging over him.
Yeah. So how did the prosecution approach the second trial?
They knew they couldn't use the journals this time.
Right.
So they really focused on what they did have.
Uh-huh.
All of Wesley's lies.
Okay.
His money problems.
Yeah.
And just his overall manipulative behavior.
So it's like they were building this bigger picture of him.
Yeah. They wanted to show the jury that he was so desperate to keep up his image.
Right.
That he would do anything to silence Jocelyn.
Because she was the one who could expose him.
Exactly.
And what about the defense? What was their strategy?
They stuck with the idea of reasonable doubt.
Okay.
Questioning everything the prosecution presented. And they tried to portray Wesley as this grieving husband who was being wrongly targeted because of his financial situation.
So they were saying the prosecution was more interested in getting a conviction than finding the truth? Okay, so the second trial happened. Were there any other, big moments that stand out?
Well, the prosecution, they were really sharp this time around.
Okay.
They kept highlighting all of Wesley's inconsistencies. All those times he lied and manipulated people.
Okay.
And they even brought in an expert on financial abuse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to talk about the patterns of behavior.
So they were trying to show that Wesley fit the profile.
Exactly.
Did that work?
It seems like it did.
Okay.
Because after deliberating, the jury came back with another guilty verdict.
Wow, so this time there was no mistrial.
No mistrial this time.
Wesley was found guilty of murder.
Guilty of first-degree murder.
So what were the reactions like after the verdict?
For Jocelyn's family and friends, it was a huge relief.
Yeah, I bet.
Finally they felt like justice had been served.
Yeah.
But for Wesley's family, it was devastating.
Of course, yeah.
His mother, who had always supported him, she still maintained that he was innocent.
It's a really sad situation all around.
Yeah.
So we've been through this whole case.
Yeah, a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah, a lot of twists and turns. And what are some of the biggest things you think people should take away from this story?
I think the biggest one is that you can't always judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
People can hide their true selves really well.
Right.
And sometimes even the people closest to us
can
have these secrets and motivations that we just don't see.
It's also a good reminder to trust your gut, right?
Absolutely. If something feels wrong, it probably is.
And don't be afraid to talk about things like finances and personal issues.
Yeah, communication is key.
In any relationship.
Right.
I think this case also shows just how complicated the justice system can be.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We saw how easily a trial can be affected by tiny little details or even a procedural error that can completely change the outcome.
It's true. And it shows that finding justice isn't always easy.
Yeah.
It takes time and it takes perseverance.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive.
It has.
A really fascinating case with so many twists and turns.
Definitely keeps you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, and it really makes you think about the people in your own life,
It does.
How well do we really know anyone?
It's a good question to ask.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us for another deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.